There is a specific kind of confusion that lives in the early stages of certain dynamics with men, and it is not the confusion of someone who has no information. It is the confusion of someone who has plenty of information, but none of it is adding up into a coherent picture. He is attentive sometimes and absent other times. He is warm in certain contexts and strangely unavailable in others. The connection feels real in specific moments and oddly hollow in the spaces between those moments. Something doesn't quite fit. Something keeps not quite fitting. And the part of her brain that is paying attention knows it, has known it, actually, for longer than she's been willing to say out loud. But knowing something feels off and being able to name exactly what is off are two different cognitive operations. And the gap between them is where a lot of women spend a lot of unnecessary time, because without the ability to name the pattern, the default response is to keep gathering evidence, keep extending benefit of the doubt, keep trying to figure out if what she's sensing is real or if she's creating a problem that isn't there. This video closes that gap. Not with vague warnings about men who aren't serious, but with specific behavioral pattern level signs that distinguish a man who is genuinely interested in her as a person from a man whose interest begins and ends at the physical. These signs are not about isolated incidents or individual bad days. They are about the structural patterns that reveal what a man is actually there for. Patterns that become clear once someone gives her the framework to see them accurately. 1. His attention has an on-off switch tied to one thing. Consistency is one of the least glamorous but most diagnostically accurate indicators of genuine interest in another person. Not the consistency of grand gestures or peak romantic moments. Those are easy to produce selectively and mean very little in isolation. The consistency that actually reveals what a man is there for is the ordinary, context-independent, no particular reason kind. The attention that shows up on a Tuesday afternoon with nothing on the agenda. The engagement that exists in the spaces between the moments that have an obvious payoff. The interest that doesn't require a specific destination to justify its presence. A man whose interest is purely physical cannot produce that kind of consistency because the motivation that generates his attention is not present independent. It is destination dependent. His engagement is not powered by genuine curiosity about her or genuine enjoyment of her company as a complete person. It is powered by a specific outcome he is oriented toward. And when that outcome is not immediately available or immediately on the horizon, the motivation that produces his attentiveness goes dormant. The attention doesn't disappear dramatically. It just quietly, consistently becomes scarce in every context where the specific destination isn't accessible. The pattern this produces is specific enough to map clearly once it's been named. He is reliably available and reliably warm in the late evening hours when plans can develop in a particular direction. He responds quickly and engagingly to messages that carry a certain energy or a certain type of content. He makes genuine effort when the context creates obvious potential for the outcome he's oriented toward. And in the ordinary daylight hours, the Tuesday afternoons, the casual check-ins, the how was your day conversations that have no destination attached, his availability drops noticeably, not to zero, necessarily, but to a frequency and quality that stands in obvious contrast to the engagement he produces when the context is different. The on-off quality of the attention is what makes this pattern diagnostically distinct from normal variation in communication frequency. Every person has days where they're more or less available, more or less communicative, more or less engaged. That normal variation does not have a consistent directional pattern. It is distributed relatively randomly across different contexts and times. But the attention pattern of a man whose interest is primarily physical is not randomly distributed. It has a direction, it clusters around specific contexts, and drains away from others in a way that, once observed over sufficient time, cannot be explained by normal life variation. The pattern is too consistent, too contextually specific, and too reliably correlated with one particular variable to be coincidental. Research on mate-seeking behavior and intentionality in early relationship stages identifies what behavioral psychologists call effort calibration, the degree to which an individual's investment of time, attention, and energy in a potential partner scales with their long-term interest in that partner. Men with genuine long-term interest demonstrate effort that is relatively stable across varied contexts, present in the romantic moments and present in the ordinary ones, because the motivation driving the effort is the person herself rather than a specific outcome she represents. Men whose interest is narrowly physical demonstrate effort that is highly context sensitive, generous when the context supports the outcome they're oriented toward, and notably reduced when it doesn't. The practical test for identifying this pattern is uncomfortable to apply but straightforward in design. Observe what happens to his availability, responsiveness, and warmth in the contexts that have no physical dimension attached. The daytime conversations, the plans that don't lead anywhere in particular, the moments of ordinary connection that are valuable only if she herself is valuable to him beyond what she physically represents. Does his engagement in those contexts match his engagement in the others? Or is there a consistent directional gap between the two that has become predictable enough that she already knows, before she reaches out in a neutral context, roughly what level of response to expect? That gap, if it exists consistently, is not a reflection of his schedule or his communication style or the natural ebb and flow of early relationship development. It is a disclosure. His attention has been showing her exactly what it is powered by, and the on-off switch has been pointing at the answer the entire time. She just needed the framework to read what it was pointing at. 2. He invests in the physical and almost nothing else. Investment is one of the most honest things a person does in a relationship, because unlike words, which can be curated and strategically deployed, investment requires actual resources: time, energy, creativity, effort, attention. These are finite, and where they actually go, not where someone says they go, but where the behavioral record shows they consistently flow, reveals the genuine priority structure underneath the presented one. A man can say many things about what he values and who she is to him. His investment pattern will either confirm or contradict everything he says, and the investment pattern does not lie. A man whose interest is primarily physical invests in a very specific and identifiable way. His investment is generous, creative, and genuinely effortful in the dimensions of the relationship that support or lead toward physical connection, and notably thinner, more perfunctory, or largely absent in every other dimension. The distribution is not random. It is structurally consistent, pointing in one direction with a reliability that, once observed across sufficient time, cannot be attributed to personality or circumstance. It is the behavioral fingerprint of a man whose interest has a specific geography, and everything outside that geography receives what's left over after the primary destination has been serviced. The physical investment shows up first and most visibly because it's the dimension where the motivation is strongest. He puts thought into the setting. He pays attention to her physical comfort, her physical preferences, her physical responses with a specificity and attentiveness that communicate genuine investment. Because in this dimension, genuine investment is exactly what's present. The effort here is real. The creativity here is real. The attention to detail here is real. And because this investment is real and visible and feels significant, it is very easy in the early stages to interpret it as evidence of overall genuine interest, to use the quality of investment in this specific dimension as a proxy for investment across the whole relationship. That interpretive leap is where the confusion typically takes root, because the investment that exists in the physical dimension does not automatically indicate equivalent investment elsewhere. And in the case of a man whose interest is primarily physical, it specifically does not. The same man who plans something thoughtful and puts genuine effort into the physical dimension of an encounter will have almost no corresponding investment in what she's going through professionally, what she's thinking about, what she's worried about, what she wants from her life in the next 5 years. Those dimensions of her existence are not where his investment is allocated, which means they receive the minimum engagement required to maintain the connection without triggering a conversation about the imbalance. The minimum engagement pattern is worth examining specifically because it is the mechanism by which the investment imbalance gets managed without becoming obviously visible. He is not completely disengaged from the non-physical dimensions of the relationship. Complete disengagement would be too obvious, too easily identified, too likely to produce the direct conversation he is not interested in having. Instead, he produces just enough engagement in those dimensions to maintain the overall relational temperature without actually investing in them. He asks the occasional question without following up on the answer. He listens with the appearance of attention without retaining or returning to what was shared. He expresses the appropriate interest in her life without demonstrating the behavioral follow-through that genuine interest produces. The performance of investment across all dimensions is present. The actual investment is concentrated in one. Psychologists studying partner evaluation in early relationship stages describe a concept called investment differential analysis, the assessment of how a potential partner's investment is distributed across different relationship dimensions as an indicator of their long-term relational intentions. Research consistently shows that men with genuine long-term romantic interest demonstrate investment that is relatively evenly distributed across physical, emotional, intellectual, and practical dimensions, because genuine interest in a person as a whole generates engagement with the whole person. Men whose interest is primarily physical demonstrate measurable investment concentration in the physical dimension, with corresponding deficits elsewhere, a distribution pattern that becomes statistically clear when observed across sufficient time and varied contexts. The practical implication of understanding this pattern is that investment distribution, rather than investment volume, is the more accurate diagnostic metric. A man can invest heavily in the relationship in absolute terms, significant time, significant effort, significant resources, and still be showing her a primarily physical interest if that heavy investment is overwhelmingly concentrated in one dimension. Volume without distribution is not genuine overall interest. It is high-intensity, narrow interest that has been mistaken for broad engagement because the intensity in the narrow dimension is compelling enough to obscure the deficit everywhere else. She deserves someone whose investment reaches all of her, not just the parts that serve a specific purpose. And a man whose effort map has one heavily marked destination surrounded by largely unmarked territory is not a man who is interested in the journey. He is a man who arrived with a specific address already entered and has been navigating toward it the entire time. 4. He manages the relationship to prevent it from deepening. This is the most sophisticated sign on this list, and the most difficult to identify in real time, because it requires observing not just what he does, but what he consistently, carefully, and almost imperceptibly avoids. The previous 3 signs are identifiable through presence: the presence of a specific attention pattern, the presence of investment concentration in one dimension, the presence of emotional disengagement. This sign is identifiable through absence: the consistent, structured, behaviorally patterned absence of everything that would allow the relationship to develop beyond the specific territory he is comfortable occupying. A man who wants to maintain physical access without emotional investment has a management problem. The management problem is this: genuine human connection, when 2 people spend sufficient time together, has a natural gravitational pull toward depth. Relationships that are allowed to develop organically tend to deepen over time. Emotional intimacy tends to follow physical intimacy when both people are genuinely invested. Conversations tend to get more revealing. Vulnerability tends to increase as familiarity builds. The natural trajectory of human connection, left unmanaged, moves toward the kind of depth that he specifically does not want. Because depth creates attachment, attachment creates expectation, and expectation creates exactly the kind of relational complexity that a primarily physical interest is not equipped to sustain. So he manages it. Not through obvious rejection of depth. Obvious rejection would produce the direct conversation he is not interested in having. Through something considerably more subtle, the consistent, low-visibility maintenance of the relationship at a specific temperature that never gets cold enough to end and never gets warm enough to deepen. He keeps things in a perpetual holding pattern, present enough to maintain access, unavailable enough to prevent the development of the kind of connection that would generate legitimate expectations he cannot meet. The future conversation avoidance is one of the clearest behavioral signatures of this management strategy. A man with genuine long-term interest in a woman is not threatened by conversations about the future, where things are going, what this is, what he's looking for. He may not have every answer immediately, but the conversation itself does not produce the specific discomfort that future talk generates in a man whose interest is primarily physical. That specific discomfort, the subject change, the vague non answer, the sudden need to keep things light, the let's just enjoy what we have response that sounds reasonable but functions as a ceiling, is the behavioral signature of a man who knows exactly where this is going and is managing her expectations to prevent her from arriving at that conclusion before he's ready for her to. The relationship labeling avoidance operates through the same mechanism with a different surface presentation. Keeping the dynamic undefined is not neutral. It is strategic. An undefined relationship is a relationship without the explicit expectations that definition creates. Without definition, she cannot legitimately hold him accountable to standards that apply to people in defined relationships, because the absence of definition is always available as a defense against those standards. He is not her boyfriend. He never said he was. The expectations that come with that label, therefore, don't technically apply. The undefined space is not a sign of someone taking things slowly and thoughtfully. It is structural ambiguity being maintained deliberately, because ambiguity is the environment in which the arrangement he wants can continue operating without the accountability that clarity would impose. The intimacy ceiling management is perhaps the most psychologically intricate component of this behavioral pattern. When conversations move toward genuine depth, when she shares something vulnerable, when emotional disclosure starts building real intimacy, when the connection starts developing the texture of something that goes beyond the physical, he produces a response that acknowledges the moment without fully entering it. He receives enough of what she shared to avoid seeming disengaged, while redirecting enough to prevent the depth from fully establishing itself. The response is warm enough to feel safe, but shallow enough to prevent the foundation that genuine emotional intimacy would create. He is managing the temperature of the connection with a precision that is not consciously calculated in most cases, but is behaviorally consistent enough to constitute a clear pattern. Behavioral research on relationship progression and intentionality identifies what psychologists call commitment calibration behavior, the specific set of actions and avoidances through which individuals regulate the pace and depth of relationship development in accordance with their actual long-term intentions. Research consistently shows that individuals who intend genuine long-term investment allow and actively facilitate relationship deepening. They lean into vulnerability, welcome future conversations, seek definition, and demonstrate comfort with the increasing emotional stakes that genuine connection produces. Individuals who do not intend genuine long-term investment demonstrate the opposite behavioral cluster. They regulate depth, avoid definition, manage emotional temperature, and maintain the relationship at the specific level of intimacy that serves their actual interest without exceeding it. The cumulative experience of being in a relationship that is being managed this way has a specific psychological texture that is worth naming, because many women feel it without being able to articulate what they're feeling. It is the persistent sense of almost close enough to feel real, almost defined enough to feel secure, almost deep enough to feel genuinely known. The relationship perpetually exists in the space just before the next level, never quite reaching it, never quite falling back far enough to force a clear decision. That almost quality is not accidental. It is the precise temperature he has been calibrating for, warm enough to maintain her presence, contained enough to prevent the depth that would change the nature of what this is. A woman who recognizes this pattern is not dealing with a man who is emotionally unavailable in a general sense, or a man who needs more time, or a man who simply moves slowly. She is dealing with a man who has made a specific operational decision about what this is, and has been quietly, consistently, skillfully managing the dynamic to keep it exactly there. The management is the message, and the message, read accurately, is that he already knows what he wants from this. He has simply been ensuring that she takes as long as possible to figure out that it isn't what she came here for. Conclusion. His attention has an on-off switch tied to one specific context. His investment is generous in one dimension and notably thin everywhere else. Her emotional world registers as largely irrelevant to his genuine interest, and the relationship is being carefully managed to stay exactly warm enough to maintain access and exactly shallow enough to prevent the depth that would generate expectations he has no intention of meeting. None of these signs require a confrontational conversation to be visible. None of them require him to admit anything. They are written in the behavioral record, in the patterns of his attention, the distribution of his investment, the quality of his emotional engagement, and the consistent structural avoidance of everything that would allow this to become something real. The evidence was never hidden. It just needed a framework to be read accurately. His attention has an on-off switch tied to one specific context. His investment is generous in one dimension and notably thin everywhere else. Her emotional world registers as largely irrelevant to his genuine interest. And the relationship is being carefully managed to stay exactly warm enough to maintain access and exactly shallow enough to prevent the depth that would generate expectations he has no intention of meeting. None of these signs require a confrontational conversation to be visible. None of them require him to admit anything. They are written in the behavioral record, in the patterns of his attention, the distribution of his investment, the quality of his emotional engagement, and the consistent structural avoidance of everything that would allow this to become something real. The evidence was never hidden. It just needed a framework to be read accurately. Here is what matters most, and what most content on this topic never says clearly enough. Recognizing this dynamic is not the end of something worth having. It is the beginning of not wasting any more time on something that was never going to become what she deserved. A man whose interest stops at the physical is not a man who needs more time, more patience, or a better version of her to unlock something deeper. He is a man who already showed her exactly what this is. The only question that remains is how long she decides to keep auditing the same behavioral record, hoping the numbers change. They won't. The pattern is the answer, and the answer, read clearly, is an instruction. If this video named something you've been feeling but couldn't quite articulate, if any of these 4 signs described a dynamic you're currently in or recently came out of, drop it in the comments. Be specific about what you recognized. This community reads every comment, and many receive personal responses, because figuring out where you actually stand with someone is one of the most disorienting experiences available. And you deserve someone actually engaging with your specific situation rather than offering generic reassurance. If this gave you clarity today, do something with it. Like it, share it with a woman who needs this framework right now, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. This is the kind of direct, psychology-backed relationship content that keeps coming, and every single video is built to give you the tools to see clearly, decide accurately, and protect your time, your energy, and your emotional investment from dynamics that were never designed to honor any of them. Here is what matters most, and what most content on this topic never says clearly enough. Recognizing this dynamic is not the end of something worth having. It is the beginning of not wasting any more time on something that was never going to become what she deserved. A man whose interest stops at the physical is not a man who needs more time, more patience, or a better version of her to unlock something deeper. He is a man who already showed her exactly what this is. The only question that remains is how long she decides to keep auditing the same behavioral record, hoping the numbers change. They won't. The pattern is the answer, and the answer, read clearly, is an instruction. If this video named something you've been feeling but couldn't quite articulate, if any of these 4 signs described a dynamic you're currently in or recently came out of, drop it in the comments. Be specific about what you recognized. This community reads every comment, and many receive personal responses, because figuring out where you actually stand with someone is one of the most disorienting experiences available, and you deserve someone actually engaging with your specific situation rather than offering generic reassurance. If this gave you clarity today, do something with it. Like it, share it with a woman who needs this framework right now, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. This is the kind of direct, psychology-backed relationship content that keeps coming, and every single video is built to give you the tools to see clearly, decide accurately, and protect your time, your energy, and your emotional investment from dynamics that were never designed to honor any of them.